Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting for Bedford Township for December 4th, 2018. Please stand for the pledge. Christians Church, open us up in prayer. Just make sure the mic's on. The little green button on the...
Please bow your head with me for prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord God Almighty, I'm always grateful for the privilege of being able to come to these meetings and to open with prayer. When I stand here, I'm always reminded, Lord, of the responsibility of the board that's sitting before all of us. I pray for them for great wisdom, that they would make decisions that are God-honoring decisions and good for this community. But I'm also reminded of my own responsibility as a member of this community to remember each day to do as your word instructs, which is to pray for those in authority. And so, Lord, as we gather here today, I pray that you would remind us all to not just show up at the meetings with agendas and things to do, but to remember that as a community we need to pray for one another and pray for your wisdom upon our community. May you be honored and glorified at this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Okay, public hearing, a request for approval of a resolution to establish Summerlyn Phase 4 Streetlight Special Assessment District. I look for a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Okay, motion is supported by Mr. Steiner. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Okay, this time, if you'd like to come up and speak, now would be the time to do so. Okay, seeing none, I look to close the public hearing. Look for a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, motion is supported by Mr. Steiner. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0.
This hearing is to establish Summerlyn Phase 4 streetlights. There are 7 lights total. The developer has paid for the installation of those lights, and the monthly charge is going to be $14.25 per parcel in usage. And I would like to make a motion that we approve the Summerlyn Phase 4 streetlight district consisting of 7 lights, all paid for by the developer as presented.
Support.
Okay, motion supported. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 2, approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
Motion is supported by Ms. Tinneberry. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 3, the consent agenda. Agenda committee reports, the meeting, November 20th, 2018. The resignation of Corey Welch from the Communications Media Committee. The appointment of Dale Barton to the Communications Media Commission. And the resignation of Joan Dutton from the Park Commission.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Support.
Motion is supported. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 4, presentations. A, wastewater treatment budget. Deputy Drain Commissioner Tim Sergo, come on up.
Tim Sergo, Deputy Drain Commissioner, representing David Thompson, the Monroe County Drain Commissioner. And annually, we come before this board to get the budget for the wastewater treatment plant to be approved. So we respectfully submit such budget. The budget is up 5.4%. The two main reasons is electricity is up, and the second is labor cost. And it's a tricky budget this year because of, we put extra money in labor because we're going to have people at the plant from 7 in the morning to 7 at night because of the construction that's going to be going on for the next 2.5 years. And so we normally only run a 7 to 3 operation, so I'm going to have to put a couple guys on afternoons. And they do have the option working on Saturday, so there may be some overtime involved. To have somebody there, we don't want people at the plant without plant operators there to make sure no mishaps happen at the plant while contractors are on site.
Anybody have any questions? Tim? Okay. Then I look for a motion.
A motion, I thought we're taking this, is this not what we're doing at 8C?
Yes. All right,
So-
thank you, Tim. Nobody has any questions. Okay, number 5, public comment. Comments limited to 2 minutes for board agenda items only. Come on up. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on.
Wait, is he
Oh.
coming up?
Okay,
Thank
coming
you.
up. Come on up. Okay. Well, if you're going to speak on an agenda item, now's the time to do so.
Okay, new business?
Yes.
My name is Jim Duggan. I live at 8690 Mary Meadows in Temperance. And I am commenting on the new business item to approve a rezoning of a parcel on Lewis Avenue from PBO to C3. I understand that the Township Planning Commission has narrowly recommended that the parcel be rezoned without much discussion and consideration of the predominantly residential character of the neighborhood immediately adjacent to the parcel. And I also understand that the Monroe County Planning Commission has handily recommended to deny this zoning approval, maintaining the PBO nature of the parcel, being in the best interests of the area, the residents, and the surrounding character of the parcel. I suppose I would feel remiss if I didn't remind the board that in considering these zoning ordinance changes, 1, they become permanent, 2, they are a general zoning approval, so that approval of a C3 zoning opens up Pandora's box of whatever subsequent use coincides with the C3 zoning. Also, that under the Zoning Enabling Act,
Your time is up. Thank you for your comments. Any more comments from the public?
Judy Frankowski, 1115 Ashland Drive in Temperance. I too share Jim's concern about going from PBO to a C3 zoning on that because of the intense zoning change that it is. And people do live next door to it and around the corner from the area. I don't see a lot of people here that are worried about it. I don't know if they've already spoken, if they feel like their words don't matter, their thoughts don't matter, if that's why nobody's here, or if they're in agreement with it. But I do have my concerns as the way the township is kind of looking like the Dollar General store on Summerfield and Stearns. It gives me shivers. I don't think that's going to be attractive at all, and like we need another one. So hopefully this rezoning will not allow for another dollar store or something of that type. So I just hope that you take into consideration what it could look like, what the township is starting to look like, and how it's just changing where we live. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any more comments? Okay, seeing none, look to move to 8, new business, a request for approval of vouchers for payment. Ms. Hirschberger?
I'd like to make a motion that the following vouchers be approved for payment. General Fund, $338,553.95. Fire District, $60,793.17. Police Fund, $1,671.62. Park Fund, $769.41. Transit System Fund, $19,590. Library Fund, $5,179.59. Sandywell SAD, $8,523.61. Mohawk Trail SAD, $371,010.62. Mildred Avenue SAD, $119. Springbrook SAD, $119. Sewer O&M Fund, $5,189.82. Trust and Agency Fund, $1,000, for a grand total of $812,519.79.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is supported by Ms. Mr. Francis. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 8B, request for approval to authorize a change in the consumer's energy lighting contract to include the streetlights in Summerlyn subdivision, Phase 4. Ms. Hirschberger?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution authorizing Consumers Energy to make changes in the standard streetlight contract as presented.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Clemens, supported by...
It doesn't matter,
Is my
just
motion.
trying to move it
Okay,
along.
Motion
It's a
supported
no-brainer.
by Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Peroni?
Aye, the motion passed 7-0. It was just so quick, I hate it. Item 8C, request for approval of the 2019 budget for operation and maintenance of the Bedford Township sewage disposal system. Mr. Francis?
In the packet, all the board members have the resolution that I propose that we adopt in a minute, and then you have all the documentation that was presented from the Drain Commission to us outlining what their budget is, line for line, and you can see that. This is something that we've done every year for a long time, probably ever since we started operating the sewer system. We pay it in 6 payments over the year to operate our plant, and they manage the plant for us. So if it's in order, I would move that we approve and adopt the resolution to establish the 2019 budget for operation and maintenance of the Bedford Township sewer system as presented.
Support.
Okay, motion supported. Ms. Tinneberry, discussion? I just want to say, for me personally, I've looked into this matter. I've talked to Tim and Dave at the drain office, because it is a lot of money to operate, to maintain it or operate it. And I've been assured and been showed information. They run a tight budget over there, and they have a lot of great employees. So, you know, because I thought to myself, should we be doing a study to see if we could do it cheaper, you know? But they do a great job over there, so I appreciate that. So, any more discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 8D, request for approval of the recommendation for the Park Commission to appoint Carol Laurie to the vacant Park Commission position. Mr. Clemens, you want to take that one?
Yeah, as you guys saw in the consent agenda, we accepted the resignation of a park board member, and previously this year, members of this board, in conjunction with the park board, conducted interviews. Carol Laurie finished second in that process. We filled the previous vacancy with Rusty Wilkes, and the park board, given the time and proximity to that round of interviews, the landscape of what the park board has done, feels like it would be most appropriate and most judicious to go back to that applicant pool. Feels like Ms. Laurie is a benefit to the park board and is asking this board to approve that recommendation to the current vacant position, please.
And I have to agree with Mr. Clemens. I think, they've gone through a long process, not a short time ago, with applications and a lot of great applicants, and you were one of them. And I look forward to you being on the park board. I think it's a great addition. Sorry to lose Joan, but yeah, I mean, you guys just went through this, and there's no point in starting the process over. The people are still interested, so I think it's a great idea. Ms. Stenberg?
That was going to be my question. Are we sure that she's still interested? I did not know that. Nice
Okay.
to meet you.
There she is.
Carol. Nice to meet you, and welcome aboard. I'm assuming that this is going to go well. Vote is going to go in your favor. I think it's wonderful that people are interested. We'll step up. This is time-consuming. It does take a lot of work on the park board, and I appreciate their time, and so I'm thankful that you're willing. And again, nice meeting you.
Okay, I look for a motion.
Mr. Supervisor, I'll make a motion that this board would accept the recommendation to appoint Carol Laurie to the vacant park commission position to fill the duration of Joan Dutton's appointment to the board.
Second.
I'll support. Okay, motion supported by Mr. Montry. Discussion?
Got a question
Okay.
for her. Did they explain to you that each park board member has to personally mow one of the parks?
Never mind, you don't need to come up for that.
You weren't supposed to tell her tonight.
Yeah, tweezers.
Could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0.
Congratulations, Carol.
Yeah, welcome aboard. Item 8E, request to approve relaxed setbacks for Hickory Ridge Skilled Care Facility, parcel number 5802-035-053-62, 951 Hickory Creek Boulevard. Is there a representative here? Come on up, sir. The request to consider relaxed setbacks as recommended by the Planning Commission for Hickory Ridge Skilled Care Facility located within the Hickory Ridge Creek Plan Unit Development, otherwise known as 951 Hickory. Request to enter into a planned unit development agreement with Aspen Ridge Senior Leasing Hickory Ridge Skilled Care Facility within the Hickory Creek Plan Unit Development for parcels. Do you have anything you'd like to add to it, or kind of give us a little synopsis of what's going on?
Sure.
You guys have a great facility over there, and
Yeah, thank you. My name is Charles Pauling. Sorry, Brad. I go by Brad. I'm an architect with PH7 Architects. We were enlisted by Aspen Ridge Senior Living Care and Hickory Ridge of Temperance to develop plans for an addition and renovation of their space. And so on behalf of them, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. And in short summary, I know that this is a process that's been going on for a couple years now. The real key to it is that there is a need within the facility to increase their capacity some, and given the challenges of their site, we looked at several additions at some time ago. I think it was as many as 20 or 25 beds. We've brought that addition down to only 14 new units, which would increase their capacity by 16 beds. But it would also solve one of the key problems they have as staff and parking capacity on their property, and just how difficult it is. And so in light of that, the Aspen Ridge Senior Leasing purchased the property across the street from Hickory Creek with the goal and effort to help alleviate their parking concerns on their property. And so right now, I know that staff and others are using a grass lot over on that side of the street, and the intent is to improve that and bring it up to a standard that is of merit for that community and your community, and improve the conditions for their staff. So, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions. As far as the setback goes itself, I know there's some in literature. I'm happy to pass around a couple boards if you'd like to see them. I know it's in the packet that was presented to you. The real key is that as we looked at the site and looked at the constraints on the site, really the only space to grow is in the direction of Hickory Creek. And we looked at several studies where we minimize that footprint as much as we possibly can. And so our concept was basically what it amounts to a single loaded corridor, which is not an ideal addition for a senior living facility and from a cost standpoint, but it is the right thing to do. So we have units that ring the outside of that and some common core space in the middle. But as a result, we looked at the setbacks and said that that's something that we'd like to study with you and see if the community is amenable to revising that. And the fact that it's a PUD, I think it gave us some flexibility to look at that. I would say that as we set the precedent for that particular parcel, I think one thing to keep in mind is that it is the only commercial property on Hickory Creek. So you're not setting a precedent that would be usable for other facilities coming down the road. And in large scheme of things, the residential properties that are just past our facility, the setbacks are not it doesn't vary too far from what is the residential setback that's just down the street. So hopefully, like I said, I'm happy to answer other questions. The rendering that was produced, and I have a board of that here. I can pass around, but this represents what we think the facility would look like as you turn into Hickory Creek. And the character is indicative of what we would propose and so forth. So this is a pretty good feel for what that street frontage would look like. So I'll pass it around in case you don't have it.
Thank you.
Do these sidewalks tie into the neighborhood?
They do.
Okay,
They would.
that's good. And can you talk to me a little bit about the proposed emergency access drive?
Certainly. In speaking with staff and with the fire department, currently, as you approach the building, you sort of go past the front door and you make a hard turn in, and then you loop around back towards the front. So one of the challenges was to establish a turn into the property that actually puts you more to where the front door is. But as a result of that, that drive starts to move too far from the back of the facility. So for the purposes of fire emergency access, we've included a runoff, if you will. It's almost like a fire lane. So fire apparatus can pull off the street and get to the back of the building without being in the way of Hickory Creek itself. And so that's really the point of that.
Okay, good. I'm glad to see there's a sidewalk from the parking lot, so people they won't be walking in the street as little as possible, I guess. So, anybody else have any questions? Mr. Steiner?
Just a couple comments, actually. I know this has been ongoing proposal, trying to figure out a way to fit this in the envelope. Talking about moving the street if possible, and numerous things that didn't quite fit, especially with the road commission. There definitely is a need there. My family has used that facility, and it was always full. It's hard to get in. I can see where the need is to add beds in this facility. I know that when that was actually built, the people that live just to the east of that facility, I think it may have turned over, 50% by now of the same ownership. But the people that were there said they were glad to see that. They would rather see that than some kind of businesses such as a strip. I've talked to a couple people recently. I asked what they thought about the parking lot being on the north side. And it was, as was stated about parking in the grass, that was one thing that came up. They'd rather see somebody parking in a nice parking lot than just a bunch of cars all over in the grass. Of course, the grass gets ruts in it then, and it looks sort of ugly. And again, comment came up, they'd rather see that for that facility and that particular use that serves the community other than more strip marts and things like that. So the people I've talked to have had a positive comment. I haven't had any direct negative ones there. I personally drive that entrance every day. I guess the only concern or question for the most part that I have is during all the construction and the maintenance of that road and the condition of that road once they're ready to leave, hoping that it looks as nice and black as that picture you passed around.
Yeah, I appreciate the concerns of construction traffic and debris on roads and so forth, and so it is going to be a goal of the facility and of the contractor that we ultimately select to build the building to carefully administer that. It is a challenge, I'm not going to lie. Moving an entrance like that, we're an occupied facility. We have to maintain occupancy and maintain all of the egress and safety factors from inside the building as well. So it's a challenge, but I think with proper maintenance, screening, fencing, other things like that, protecting the road is obviously the paramount and inconvenience to, I mean, having the space across the street would allow for some staging, and so my guess is that a contractor would come in and say they'd like to be able to cross that road with some of their traffic. So there is an element of that we have to maintain, and if I think my client would be agreeable to making sure that the contractor does the necessary things to keep the road clean, especially in inclement weather when mud and stuff is being trucked across. That is not a convenient thing for anyone that's in and out of that neighborhood, especially since that's the only entrance and exit from the residential community as large. So it's something that I definitely think we would address.
And I'm not just worried so much about the mud, but the condition of the road itself with the heavy equipment. We all have seen things that happen with heavy equipment.
Yep.
You're definitely going to have some in there.
Yep.
And that's the biggest concern, that the blacktop itself has no damage from the equipment coming in.
And I think we could talk with staff about what may be necessary for that. I mean, there are strategies in place to protect it, but also if there's too much damage, whether there's milling and overlaying or other things like that, I think that we'd have to talk about how much do we feel like that road's going to be impacted. But I think it's something that we could consider with staff. So.
Okay, that's all, Mr. President.
So you'd be willing to mill and fill the whole neighborhood?
Probably not the whole neighborhood, but I think
Thanks, Paul.
and
the
to
bridge.
protect a little, I think they would be willing to do it.
Just trying to help, Rick.
It's about 2 miles road.
Yeah, I might be more than willing to chew, but yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, seeing none, I look for Mr. Goldsmith.
I had a question, but just a couple of
Okay.
comments
Okay.
for the board. If the board approves, first of all, your PUD ordinance gives you the exclusive authority to relax the setbacks as opposed to the BZA. So that's why that's here. This PUD goes back to 1997. It's one of the first ones that was done in the township. But I would recommend that your approval include a condition that we enter into a written PUD agreement, which is part 2 of your agenda, with the owner for these 2 parcels that are before you tonight, and that it also be conditioned on final site plan approval by the township and conditioned on approval by all of the other reviewing agencies, so that we have that all in place as this project moves forward. That would be my recommendation.
Ms. Stingley?
Well, I'm going to attempt a motion. My question to Phil is, will it be 2 motions?
The first, yes, the first
Okay.
motion
Okay.
would be to approve the relaxed setbacks for the Hickory Ridge Skilled Care Facility as set forth on your agenda and as recommended by the Planning Commission. And then the second motion under 8F would be to enter into a planned unit development agreement for these 2 parcels.
Okay. What
Long
he-
answer for
What
one
he
motion.
just said. No, it's 2 motions.
Yeah.
It's 2
You
motions.
go
Yeah.
from 8E to 8F.
I'm gonna listen to the attorney. Thank you, Supervisor. Okay, I would like to move. I'd like to move with as many friendly amendments as are offered, please. I'd like to move that we relax, the Bedford Township Board relax the setbacks as recommended by the Planning Commission for Hickory Ridge Skilled Care Facilities located within the Hickory Creek Plan Unit Development and parcel number 5802-035-053-62, otherwise known as 951 Hickory Creek Boulevard. Is there anything else with that one?
I'll second.
Just relaxing, okay.
If I may, Mr. Goldsmith, I believe that in the last discussion with Planning Commission, there was a portion of the motion for consideration of a minor plan approval versus a major plan approval. I thought that was part of this the first piece from my discussions with Mrs. Kincaid. Is that a part, can that be formally part of the motion so that we make sure that it's on the record that
Their
it was
motion
approved?
does say minor change.
Does it?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, they,
Okay.
they reviewed it and they determined, based on the PUD ordinance, that this was in fact a minor change. So that should and could be incorporated into that first motion. And the motion, it can be part of the second motion, but the motion, the other aspect of that motion, and I forgot to tell you this, that these two parcels need to be, as part of the PUD agreement, joined together so that they cannot be separated, sold separately, mortgaged separately, so that they will stay together, because it's intended that the northern parcel be and provide for parking for the southern parcel where the facility is. So that's the other
That
aspect.
was going to be part of that, because that's in their motion. That's, I was just,
Yes.
I was just repeating their motion. So are we going to vote on the first one then, or, okay? Did you put the minor thing in there? A minor change? Okay. Okay, that's my motion. Is there a
We have
second?
a second
I
for
did
Support.
Steiner.
Okay. Motion is supported, discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll?
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. Item 8F,
Okay, no, my second motion. Unless somebody else wants to make one, I just had something already written out, but, okay. Move that we enter into a plan unit development agreement with Aspen Ridge Senior Leasing Hickory Ridge Care Facility within the Hickory Creek Plan Unit Development for parcel 5802-035-05362 and 5802-035-05361 to restrict the sale of one parcel without the other, and to prepare and record a PUD agreement for the purpose of combining the two parcels to restrict the sale of mortgage or of encumbrance of those two parcels other than together. That was kind of, I don't know who made that one, but I'll go with it. Wait, I'm sorry. And then I wanted to include the,
Final
what was
site
it
plan?
you said?
Final site plan,
Yes, final site plan.
and also all the reviewing agencies.
And all the reviewing agencies' approval, and that the road leading into Hickory Ridge would be maintained in the current road condition, the condition that it is currently.
Second.
okay, motion is supported, discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Hirschberger votes aye. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 7-0. You all set?
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Okay, item 8G, request for approval to rezone parcel number 5802-570-014-00, 6601 Lewis Avenue, from PBO Professional Business Office to C3 General Business. Is there a representative here? Come on up. Mr. Goldsmith, you want to give us a quick overview of it?
Sure, this involves the northwest corner of Lewis Avenue and Smith Road, currently zoned PBO. The owner and applicant has requested that this parcel be rezoned from PBO to C3. Public hearing was held in front of the Planning Commission as required by the Zoning Enabling Act. The Planning Commission, by a 4-3 vote, recommended to approve the requested rezoning. Actually, the Planning Commission held 2 meetings, the public hearing, and that was closed, and then a second meeting with further discussion. At the end of that second meeting on this matter, the vote was taken, and there was a 4-3 vote to recommend approval of the proposed rezoning. By law, from there, it went to the Monroe County Planning Commission. Monroe County Planning staff recommended to deny the rezoning. You have in your packet before you the reasons that denial was made. Also in your packet, you have the report from the Township Planning Consultant, Lucy Fortin at the Manick Smith Group. Ms. Fortin recommended denial of the requested rezoning for the reasons set forth in her report, and you have that in your packet before you tonight. There have been several questions posed, and I'll just review those briefly. If this parcel is zoned from PBO to C3, it will be eligible to be used for any principal permitted uses or special uses allowed in a C3 district pursuant to certain the restrictions of the zoning ordinance. So there are certain uses that more than likely would not be able to go in on that parcel because of the proximity to the Smith Road School and because of the proximity to a kitty corner to the Lewis Avenue Baptist Church and their school facility. So that's governed and that's controlled not only by our ordinance, for example, the adult entertainment ordinance, that's a special approval in a C3 district, but there are setbacks of 1,200 feet from a church, nursery, school, preschool, so that would be a use that would be ineligible for this particular corner, if that's of concern, and I'm sure it is to the board and to the residents of the township. Other uses that are eligible will be in part controlled by your ordinance regarding setbacks, regarding distances from the school or the church or the school that's on the church property. So you can take all of that into consideration, but generally speaking, when an applicant requests for rezoning, in this case to C3, that parcel will be eligible for all principal permitted uses in C3 or special land use approvals which require public hearing and going through that process. Again, subject to conditions in the ordinance. So that is what is before the board tonight. The applicant chose not to, during its discussion with, their discussion with the Planning Commission, they chose not to seek a rezoning to a lesser commercial district, such as a C1 district. They chose not to. They're asking for rezoning tonight to C3. Also, the applicant chose not to, and it's totally up to them, not to you, not to the Township Board, to offer contract or conditional rezoning. They have not proposed it. It's not on the table. That's up to them by law to offer that. They've chosen not to, and that's within their right to do that. So they're asking for rezoning to C3, period.
Okay. And the distance, just for the distance, is, I think it's roughly 593 feet to the nearest, so it's well within the 1,200.
I think Ms. Kincaid emailed to you within the last couple of days a rough, or an aerial which shows the distances to, for instance, Smith Road, from building to building and from property line to property line, and also to the Lewis Avenue Baptist Church and their school facility. So you have that in front of you to show those relative distances. They're approximate, but they're fairly accurate, I think.
Mr. Lennox, anything you'd like to add, or anybody have any questions for the applicant?
No, the only thing, I guess the only thing I would add is that this is a good thing. You know, people talk about, you know, oh my gosh, we're going to go from PBO to C3 zoning. PBO is unmarketable in this township, and I think I'm qualified to say that. If you go up and down, we have probably a 300-year supply of PBO zoning in the township that got that way because of erroneous zoning decisions that were made because they wanted to block things from going in, just like some of the uses you're talking about. You go up and down Secor Road, which is a dynamic corridor in Bedford, the most dynamic corridor in Bedford. Every time you see a vacant piece of land there, you can rest assured it's PBO. Vacant property, undevelopable, unmarketable property does not benefit the township at all. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, back in 2013, we rezoned the south, it would be the southwest corner, all 15 acres to C3, and it butts right up against a house. And oh my gosh, the awful things that people suggest never happen. It never happens, folks. I've been doing this for a long time, and there are people that would love to live next to a retail store of some kind, but you can't put a retail store in PBO. It is totally unmarketable, and some of you who know me on the board, when you were running for office, I told you, if it were up to me, you'd get rid of PBO zoning in this township and give everybody a choice to have C1, because it literally does you no good. It's just, it's bad, and there's precedents already set on that intersection. I mean, I can see no conceivable logic how you would turn this one down when you approved, and some of you on this board voted for it in 2013 to rezone the southwest corner to C3. And then recently, the bank building, which I sold in August, was rezoned to C3. Same situation we had there. The bank, we couldn't sell it because nobody wanted to buy a PBO building. There's just no market for office zoning in Bedford Township. So my thinking is, contrary to what some people would have you believe, this is good for the township. It'll be good for this intersection. As I think Paul has said to me, Paul Peroni, at one time, this is your last intersection on Lewis Avenue. There's been so many bad things that have gone wrong on Lewis Avenue. We don't need to repeat that. This is the last one you've got. And I think, and certainly the La Scala's my client. They're entitled to have their zoning just like the southwest corner, just like the southeast corner, and you got C2 on the northeast corner. It's time to, let's see if we can get this intersection developed.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Steve or any questions for Phil? Mr. Francis?
Steve, in your professional opinion, what's the difference between C1 and C3 that you would choose not to even try to go C1?
Because I've looked at the ordinances, Paul. I went through them all with my client, and we thought, we want, my job is to sell their property, and to do that, I want the maximum number of opportunities and to create a pool of prospects. Instead of being this big, it's this big. And those uses, there are more uses in C3 that could go there, and we want to be able to participate in that if it needs a special use permit and we can get it. If there's other things in the ordinance that would prevent it, that's fine, but we just want to have that opportunity. That's, C3 zoning is not the evil that has been portrayed over the years. I mean, and I would dare say, if I look at you and anybody in the audience, if you can tell me anything bad that's ever happened from C3 zoning, I haven't heard it. Because none of these awful things that are predicted never happen.
Oh,
somebody said, you open a Pandora's box. There's no Pandora's box. You open up a whole lot of opportunities to get a corner developed.
Paul were you done, Paul? Did you have something else you wanted to add?
Well, the difference that I can see between this parcel and the one at the southwest corner, the 15 acres you spoke of, is this parcel is, I believe, part of a platted subdivision.
Yeah, that was mentioned at the Planning Commission meeting, and the Planning Commission voted to approve this. And, there were people on the Plan Commission that have never, ever in their life voted for C3 zoning, ever, which I've addressed that with Mr. Peroni, but we did get it approved. And it's, and the other thing I'd say about that, Paul, I've been to all these hearings. Not one person showed up in public opposition that is in that platted subdivision. You've had some people here tonight who really have no skin in the game, other than they just don't want retail in this township.
Well, as far as having skin in the game, that doesn't matter. I think we were elected to look out for all 32,000 people, not just the ones that live around any particular property. And I feel that way wherever the property is located. It's the whole township that's...
I agree with that, Paul.
Okay.
I agree with that,
You're a smart man.
but the reality is, if the guy living next door, it didn't bother him, I mean, You know, I always go back to, what about the rights of the property owner? They're the ones making this request. They paid for it.
Paul, can I ask you, what does it matter that it's part of the platted subdivision?
Yeah, what does that mean?
I'm not being smart, I'm just asking a question. What does it matter?
I'll defer to Trudy on that.
I'm just asking, that way we can be clear.
I called Karen and I asked her, do we have C3 in any platted subdivision? So she went through all the platted subdivisions, and she said the highest zoning we have in a platted subdivision was C2. She did go back further, and before our ordinance was passed, we did have a C3. There's nothing there right now, but it's still zoned that prior to our ordinance being in place, and that's the old Flicks Market on Summerfield. Other than that, all platted subdivisions, the highest they've ever gone with a commercial is C2.
But my question is, what does it matter? That's my question. It's on the main corner of Lewis and Smith. Just because it's part of a platted subdivision, I'm just asking, what does it matter? What's the difference? Is there a difference? I mean, just because it's,
Well,
I mean, why is a business PBO part of a platted subdivision in itself?
here's what some would say. Does it matter that it's in a platted subdivision? No. That in and of itself doesn't matter. But what the planning consultant pointed out, and what I guess to get behind that statement that it's in a platted subdivision, that platted subdivision is residential. It's a residentially zoned parcel. Right, wrong, or indifferent, and actually I agree with Mr. Lennox on some aspects of PBO zoning within the township. But let's focus in on this particular intersection. The experts have pointed out that it is contiguous to residentially zoned and used and occupied properties. C3, generally speaking, is not placed contiguous to residentially occupied parcels. So that's what the planner is raising as a concern. I think that's what the Monroe County planning staff is raising as a concern. And perhaps the reason that PBO was put there in the first place is because in the planning community, it's been recognized universally as a buffer type zoning or a transition zoning from, for instance, a C3 to residential, so you have something in between those three zoning districts.
And I would say that, in circumstances, you need that buffer from residential to a C3 or whatever. But in this circumstance, when you're within that distance, because let's be honest, the only thing that's offensive to anybody probably in this room is the things that you talked about, strip club, porn shops, all these different things involving that activity are the mainly offensive things. Because I don't know if anybody on this board could name one thing that would be offensive to go there, with it being within that 1,200 feet of the schools and the church. Ms. Tenderbury?
Yeah, at the last rezoning we had on the bank, I voted against it because of my history in what I've been told about planning. Since then, I decided to do some research, and I looked into many different areas. And first of all, I want to say, is Magdalena's the C2 zoning? Because there's a restaurant surrounded by homes and a subdivision, and those people love it. They can walk to to have a meal at night and not get in their car. And the main thing this research has shown me is that we're moving out of my generation, sad to say, into a younger generation. And I won't say the word, but
He's a millennial, not me.
But
You wanna aim at
these
right now.
people,
I'm not millennial, but I'm clearly younger. so
these
if you wanna
younger people that we're so desperately wanting to graduate from high school, go to college, and come back here in Bedford, are people who move to areas where the residential touches all service areas, restaurants, all things that aren't PBO, that are commercial. They want to live in townhouses above other commercial operations. And so if we want these people to come back to Bedford, we're going to have to look to the future and start making planning decisions and zoning decisions based on what's going to attract them. I looked at 12. I found 12 intersections or corridors that have residential right next to commercial in Bedford Township. Did we even look at that? I mean, Quail Hollow, you may call that a buffer, but to me, a buffer, a doctor's office or whatever's in PBO, attracts as much traffic. Smith Road Elementary, I mean, that's not even a zoning, but look at the bus traffic and the traffic of things going on after school. That attracts the traffic that possibly we're saying that C3, we shouldn't be having this because of residential area. I'm at this point, I'm totally opposite of what I felt in the zoning of the bank, because I think we need to have, this is, Mr. Lang said it's our last one. I think it's our first one. This is the first intersection coming into Michigan from Ohio. What better place to have commercial to attract people from another state to spend their tax dollars here? We're spending plenty of tax dollars in Ohio. Let's get some of those tax dollars, Ohio tax dollars, back here. I think this is a no-brainer in terms of, and what was said earlier, who's complaining? What are we trying to protect against? These people that live around there may appreciate having some commercial that they can walk to, whether it's a restaurant or a dollar store. I mean, people like those. Why should we prevent them if people like them? Don't we want our residents to have services? I don't know. It's just my opinion.
Okay, any more comments, Mr. Clements?
Mr. Lennox, I apologize. I'll probably ask you the dumbest question of the night, but it's been weighing on my mind. I don't struggle with the zoning classification. What I struggle with is the sentence you come back to, and I think Paul hit it on the head, and I think you've alluded to it, is this is the last major intersection where we'll see development within our township.
No, I said on Lewis.
On Lewis, excuse me. I agree with that completely. Where I struggle in all of this, and because you've been associated with the property, maybe you can ease some of my anxiety, is I have to put myself in the Lascala shoes, and as a seller, I'm looking for a buyer that pays me what I'm asking for the property, bottom line. I'm not really there to vest what they want to do with it. I'm just a seller. I absolutely agree with Nancy that from a C3 standpoint, some of the demands of what our community is wanting going forward is different than what we've done in the past. And so I could see if this property was pedestrian-friendly, retail-aimed, to me it's a no-brainer. It becomes absolutely a no-brainer at that point. Where I struggle is when you all of a sudden have an excavation company that wants to store equipment there, or you have a light industrial application, and what is the potential squash on the rest of the intersection from a development standpoint? And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, because to me it's the ultimate in individual property rights versus having to watch out in the broad spectrum what's best for that intersection and for taxation and the community going down the road.
I won't be looking for excavation companies to store equipment on that site. I mean, I don't even know if that's permitted in C3. I would think it would be in some kind of industrial zoning. But if it's permitted in C3, they're not going to go there. No intelligent broker is going to try to seek that out on a signalized intersection, because number one, you won't get top dollar for those guys. They don't want that. You got a traffic signal there. It's the gold standard in retail sales, and you want to try to attract the uses that have a chance of giving the Lascalas something close to what they're asking for the property, and you create that demand by having more opportunities to do that. I mean, you bring up a hypothetical. How do I respond to that? I'm not looking for that.
I just assume you've probably thought through that logic as well, and you certainly have more experience with real estate than I do. So that's why I was looking to ask.
I look at the uses. That never even stood out in my mind for that intersection.
Okay.
So it's not, and the reality is you couldn't get the money for it that a signalized intersection with a good retail user could attract. You just won't.
Ms. Tenneberry?
I just want to share one other story that Karen Kincaid, our planner from the planning department, gave me. And when I was up there doing part of my research up there as well. And she said when the Quail Hollow and the Eaglestone and all of that was already developed there, when Wendy's came in and wanted to build, and it got approved, and they require in the ordinance to put up a fence. And the Eaglestone elderly people came to Karen and said, why do we have to have a fence? She said, well, it's in the ordinance, they have to fence up there. Well, then we at least want a gate, because we want to be the mobility to get from Eaglestone to, so my point is, it's something that people want to have, this intermobility. The younger people want to be able to bike and walk and skateboard, roller skate, whatever, wherever they want to go, and not have to get in their car and put gases into the universe. So,
I think to TC's point, though, you're not going to see many people rollerblading and biking to this location.
why? We could.
We would have to put in sidewalks and infrastructure, but it's planning for the future, though, too,
We could
which is
require
part of the
that they
master
do.
plan.
Right. You were talking about some bike from Monroe to
Yeah,
here. Yeah.
Who's
Let's go
to
that
say, who's to say you wouldn't upgrade that intersection the way you did Secor and Stearns with the sidewalks and the signage, which I thought has been an enhancement there.
absolutely.
So,
I'm just saying as is right now.
Yeah,
I think that's
no, I know.
kind of the point you were partially making.
Yeah, like I said, I don't struggle with C3, and I certainly realize no one can see into the future. I just think that what happens to that property is as big a trigger, and probably even more so than declassification for it.
Well, I'm sure, from what I see, I think probably Chick-fil-A is going to go there. If I
Oh,
Right.
not hardly.
Get Facebook rolling here, huh?
If you can assure that, let's take the vote right now.
Yeah.
I can assure you. No.
Okay, any more questions for Mr. Lennox or legal? If not, I look for a motion.
I would move that we approve the rezoning request from PBO to C3 on 5802-570-01400, otherwise known as 6601 Lewis Avenue, with all the restrictions put on the approval by planning.
Support.
Okay, motion supported, discussion. Mr. Steiner?
I'm going to just go ahead and make a couple comments based on some information, of course, reading and going through all the information. As Mr. Clement stated, I still also I struggle with, if it is a C3, there's no guarantee what it will or will not be. And I don't want to get political here, but this is a political issue and a political hot button within this community. During the planning, Mr. Lennox clearly stated some of the people he supported on the township board know exactly how he feels. This is a direct support. I agree with property rights. But just because of property rights doesn't mean I get what I want just because I can. It was also clearly stated by the owner of the property that neighboring property owners are low-income people and they don't care, nor do they have a clue. A second time stated low-income people who just do not care and are just trying to survive. The Planning Commission went through August meetings. It was moved then to September 12, where 4 of the 7 approved it, 3 turned it down. It went to Monroe Planning. Monroe Planning put their denial forward. But it didn't come back to the Bedford Township for review until tonight. It was overheard in the audience at a planning meeting that Mr. Lennox stated, well, we're going to wait till after Mr. Frederick's off the township board. I find that a little disturbing
Why is that, Rick?
Well, let him finish his comment.
because to me, that's a bullying tactic. And I know, Mr. Lennox, I told you before, probably, was it a year and a half, 2 years ago, you and a group of people put together, you wanted to wipe out this entire township board that was here at the time. That's a fact.
I think you're getting pretty political with
No,
this decision
no,
right
I'm
now.
just telling you, but I won't make a political decision because I'm being bullied. I currently,
How did you get bullied by that remark?
I
Will you
think
please-
that you, yeah,
But-
he needs to hold his remarks.
Yeah,
but I'm just,
let him.
I'm just stating that I won't be bullied to make a decision because somebody wants to say, you should get this because of that, or because I own the property. The property was requested to be rezoned to a PBO a number of years ago for a financial business. Why wasn't it requested then to be something more than PBO? Don't know. It was fine then. It was fine to put PBO. It was fine to put a building up to run a financial business. And now all of a sudden it's worthless? I don't know how.
That's not the case of that. That guy wanted a different zoning, and he was talked down to PBO. Okay, because he was my neighbor, I know who you're
Well,
talking.
we have a motion and support. I don't know what the point is. I think we need to focus at the task at hand, because I could tell you this, from my level, okay? We're trying to develop Lewis Avenue, are we not?
Good.
We are doing the best we can with this Lewis Avenue Redevelopment Committee and the Economic Development Committee, and like all the comments Ms. Tinneberry said, you didn't bully me into the decision. Nobody's bullying me into a decision. If I don't feel like C3 needed to be there, I wouldn't be considering it. But I think we need to focus on the task at hand. Do we feel like C3 needs to go there, and we're not worry about bully tactics and vote your conscience and period. If you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for it. But I don't think we need to get into all the side activity.
I call the
I don't know what
I
the
was
point
going
is.
to call the question then.
Mr. Francis?
I'd like to ask Mr. Goldsmith the question. I asked it earlier, and it didn't seem that we got an answer. What's the big difference between C1 and C3?
The
People
uses,
in the audience and they're watching on TV need to know that.
the uses that are allowed there. In a C3 district, all C1, C2 uses are allowed in the C3 district. In a C1 district, it has fewer allowable commercial uses than a C3 district. The C3 district is the most intense commercial district in the township. Now, I can't quote you verbatim what the C1 uses are versus the C3, but there are fewer uses in the C1 district, and they're, generally speaking, they're less intensive uses in the C1 district. I hope that answers your question. I can't tell you chapter and verse what those uses are. I don't have it in front of me right now, but that's what it is.
Ms. Tinneberry?
The word intense, is that a are you using that in a negative connotation?
No, not
Because
necessarily.
the uses are in our packet.
Yeah,
We-
I'm not necessarily
flexible
using
would be
that
better.
as a negative connotation.
Right.
When I use the term intensive, it envisions perhaps in certain circumstances a greater number of people visiting that site, for instance, maybe a greater number of parking spaces that might be required. There might be more traffic in and out, maybe not. It really depends on the individual use. So,
Can I just simply read some of these that are here that are considered intense? Retail business, groceries, dairy products, baked goods, personal service established, repair shops, tailor shops, photographic studios, dry cleaning establishment, nature workshops, electrician, decorator, dressmaker, tailor, baker, painter, places of assembly, theaters, assembly hall, businesses, schools, colleges, seasonal outdoor retail sales of flour, vegetable, pumpkins, restaurants, private clubs such as a lodge, bus station, hotels, motels, which is too small for that, veterinary clinics, bowling alleys, and it does say dance and catering halls, but it's already been established that those are not permitted because of the Liquor Control Commission rules and regulations, correct?
to the best of our knowledge, that's not our decision, but to the best of our knowledge, that would be an accurate statement.
So basically, to me, they're just businesses. I don't know about intense, but.
I don't know if you mentioned a refueling station or a gas station, that would be an allowable use within the C3 district. I think that does require special use approval. And there is a restriction for refueling stations or gas stations in terms of their entrances in proximity to churches or schools. So that's, I guess if you wanted me to give you an example of what I would consider as a more intensive use, that would be one. A refueling station, a gas station, which wouldn't be allowed in the C1 district. That's an example.
Right.
But to Nancy's point, though.
Oh, I didn't turn the
people-
page, there were more.
But to Nancy's point, though, some people like that. I mean, there's people that live next to BP off Lewis and Dean. You know,
I can't
some
speak
people
as,
don't, some
yeah, I
people like
can't
it.
speak to whether they like it or not, or who got there first. You know, that, I just don't know the facts in that regard. But, yes, there, at that intersection, there are homes that surround that service station.
Mr. Hirschberger, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Tinnevery?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
No.
Mr. Francis?
No.
Hirschberger votes no. Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion passed 4-3. Okay, moving on to item H, request for approval of the amendment to the Water Supply System Ordinance, number 27A-10. Mr. Goldsmith, I called you a while back, not too long ago, about this issue that I ran into. Sunrise Windows wanted to have a meeting with me. They were having a hard time with the fact that they got to tap into a fire suppression when they already tapped in at the street. $20,000 to tap into the street, it'd be another $20,000 to tap into the fire suppression. Personally, me, the only time they're gonna use that is if they have a fire, and we have a way to track that with the meter pit. So they'll get charged for the water they use. I don't understand why Bedford Township would ever wanna charge that extra charge when they've already tapped in at the street. So I called you, I said, hey, let's do something about this, let's rewrite this ordinance so we're not prohibited to business. You know, and here we are, it's, you know, on the agenda, so. So I don't know if you want to add any more to it, or.
Sure, just briefly. What this ordinance amendment does is exactly as Supervisor Peroni stated it. If a commercial or if a user is already tapped in to the water here in Bedford Township, and if they're required for fire suppression purposes to tap in again, a second tap, if you will, to the main, then this ordinance provides that they will not be charged the water privilege charge for that tap, nor will they be charged the debt service charge. With respect to the requirement of the meter pit, that's a South County water requirement for the meter pit. And so, you know, South County Water monitors that, and you're right, if water is used for fire suppression purposes, it'll be charged. But it was felt, and Tom Graham and I both support this ordinance, and Tom wrote it, but it was felt that since the property owner already paid what is sometimes commonly referred to as the tap fee, which is really the water privilege charge identified in our ordinance, and the debt service charge provided in our ordinance, if it's just for, exclusively to be used for fire suppression, they don't have to pay those fees a second time. If they needed to tap in, again, a second tap, because they were enlarging their facility and they were going to use the water for that facility coming from the main, then they would be charged those charges. But for fire suppression, they would not be. So that's what's in front of the board tonight.
Any questions from the board?
Is there any way they can change their mind and change it to full use rather than just fire suppression?
Well, I suppose that is always possible. If somebody wanted to be deceitful, I would hope that they wouldn't, but if somebody wanted to be deceitful, but usually, and in this case, I think it's well documented that this line And it's not this is not just for sunrise windows.
No.
The problem came to light because of the situation that they were presented with. Actually, I had a long discussion after Mr. Peroni spoke with me. I had a long discussion with Dennis Kohler to get his thoughts on it, and it's happened before, and he felt that it was unfair to the commercial or the industrial user to, in essence, pay twice if it's just for fire suppression. But you're right, Paul Francis. If someone wanted to be deceitful, I suppose they could try to pull the wool over our eyes. But I think if you closely reviewed, and our building department closely reviewed the plans, it would reveal that, in fact, that's what it's going to be used for, is fire suppression, exclusively for fire suppression. So I guess to prevent that, we would have to really carefully review, which I think they already do, the plans to see what the purpose of that tap is for.
You mentioned a meter pit. Explain how that works in this
Well,
situation.
yeah, South County Water requires not Bedford Township, but South County Water requires the installation of a meter pit, and that's an expensive undertaking for the property owner. And the purpose for the meter pit, and actually, as explained to me by Dennis Kohler, and our fire chief could probably echo this, it restricts the flow of water to a certain degree because you're metering the water that's being used during a fire event. But South County Water requires it. It measures the water, it meters the water being used for a fire event, and then the property owner is charged for the volume of water going through that meter pit. It's not something that the township requires, and it's not paid to the township, but it's a fairly expensive proposition for the developer, the owner, to put in.
About $70,000.
Yeah, and that's.
70.
Yeah, $70,000, $60,000 to $70,000.
And then that's part of our 20,000 though, so we could cut it down to 50 for them.
So.
Not charging that second tab in.
Yeah, so that's what the meter pit is used for. I'm not real sure why not all townships do that. I guess maybe, to your former question, Mr. Francis, the water use would be monitored through that,
I was going to say just
that meter pit.
There's the catch, right?
Yeah, the meter pit.
If they had a fire every week, they wouldn't be using that amount of water.
Right. So to that extent, that would be a way to monitor the water use if it was being used other than for fire suppression. So, good point.
With that catch being in there, I think we should adopt this. Makes a lot of sense to me. Probably should have done it 30 years ago.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
Okay. No further questions. I look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the amendment to the water supply system ordinance number 27A-10 as presented.
Support.
Motion is supportive of Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Ms. Tinevery?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Peroni?
Aye, and the motion
Oh,
passed.
and Hirschberger. Skip myself.
And the motion passed 7-0. Okay, item 9, comments from the public. Comments limited to 5 minutes. Come on up.
I think I just witnessed something that I've never seen before. First of all, I want to thank those of you who voted for the rezoning application submitted by Pat and Joe LaScala. And clearly you recognize that they were the applicant, not me. But what I felt was going on up here is people withholding a vote or denying a vote because of an animus with me, and rather than thinking about the LaScalas. And if that happened, if anybody denied that vote because of a personal animosity with me, which I don't care, and I'm not the applicant, they are. If that happened, to me, that's the most disgraceful, unprofessional behavior I've ever witnessed. My township board members. Thank you.
Okay, any more comments from the public? Just, okay, seeing none. Comments from township board members? Ms. Tinneberry?
Nothing pertaining to business, but I do want to thank each and every one of you, and those of you who sent condolences in the recent passing of a family member. It was very much appreciated. Your prayers are very much appreciated, and we can use continued prayer. Everyone is recovering, but it's a slow process when it's so sudden. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mr. Steiner?
I know that the last comment was directed to me, probably majority. This is not anything against, or I should say, that was not anything against Mr. Lennox directly, but Mr. Lennox does represent the applicant. There were some things presented by the Planning Commission that I agree with a few of the Planning Commission members, why to deny. Monroe County Planning denied, also recommended to deny by our township engineers. But as a spokesperson, the representing the client does speak for the client. The client themselves did not get up there to say anything different, so it was my opinion based on fact of finding with the Planning Commission and the other authorities who reviewed this. Nothing personal against them. Like I said, the property itself was requested a number of years ago for PBO. At that time, it could have been requested for an increase to a C1 or maybe 2 or not 2 because it's too small, but 3 back then. So of course, naturally, everybody wants to get top dollar for a piece of property that they want to sell. And I've seen it before where somebody says, I want to go for a higher zoning on my property. Now it is worth more money. I don't begrudge anybody that. But I think that the appropriate zoning for that corner, the small parcel, up against the subdivision platted with the surrounding areas, the C3 to the south has not been sold for a number of years after it was rezoned. There's one parcel that's a home along that property. And again, as I said, I made my comments not as a political statement, because if it was for a political statement, there's people out there that disagree with what I just said tonight. Those people would vote against me. Other people would vote for me. I didn't even say I'm running for election in 2 years. I don't really care. I don't run for an election. I was elected by the township, the community, not by a couple people in the community. The majority of the people that voted for me, I was number 3 on the vote. So I must be doing something right after a number of years within this community that people believe in. I make good, sound, just decisions and review what we find and state our facts. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Montry?
I just wanted to point out, I'm already increasing efficiencies. That's 2 meetings in a row before 8:30. This one might need an asterisk, though, because Logan's not here.
I actually appreciate this kind of discussion and would point out that I believe this is only the second vote in my 2 years where we've gone 4-3. I think what that says is that there was a lot of conscientious thought and that it was a very difficult decision. I struggle when you weigh personal property rights against the welfare and the benefit of the 32,000 people that live here in Bedford. I was elected to watch out for the 32,000, not individuals. But at the same time, you know, I'm always going to be very mindful of being consistent in our decisions. I say all of that to say that I know the Lascalas and I trust that good decisions will be made. And at the end of the day, I hope we're all excited that this could be a trigger for an intersection which will improve taxation in our community, which ultimately will alleviate burdens from individual real estate holders. And I think we'll all look back and see this as a good decision. Now that I'm off my soapbox for a second, I just wanted to mention 3 acts of kindness that I've seen in the last 2 days that make me very proud to be a Bedford resident. Driving here tonight, there was what I'm going to describe as a 4 or 5-year-old little boy who threw his ball out into Erie and was fully running out in the way, and thank goodness a neighbor was out there to pull him back. Didn't involve me, involved another vehicle. Nobody was hurt. But I found myself thinking it's wonderful that people are kind. I look around and see food drives and toy collection, community events, disabled veterans receiving services. And at a time where we disagree, at a time where our country fights and it seems like we argue over so many things, I think this is the one time of the year where we can put some of those swords down and appreciate a little bit the blessings that we each have and where we can try to pass those along. So thank you for the opportunity. Sorry to ruin your asterisk on the meeting.
Mr. Francis.
Mr. Lennox brought up a comment about he probably witnessed something he's never seen before, where it was a personal vendetta against the presenter. I take offense with that. I don't know if it was aimed at me, but I was one of the 3 that voted no. I voted no because I don't think it ought to be 3. I think it should be C1. I can't see any big difference that was going to scuttle a potential sale because of those differences. That's why I voted that way. I read everything in there 3 times. There's a lot in the packet, isn't there? And I just take offense to be accused of making it personal. The only person that made that personal is Mr. Lennox. Nobody at this table did. Now, I've known Steve a long time. He's a very smart man, and I like him. But I just think he's a little off base on that comment. That's it.
Ms. Hirschberger?
I too want to talk about the vote on the property. I did research, and I really struggled with this one. I had nothing to do with any of you, not the Lascalas, not Steve, no one. I just really struggled with it. I struggled because it was in a subdivision. It was in a platted subdivision, and that's why I struggled. And that's why I asked Karen about the other zonings. What are these other platted subdivisions? What kind of C? And when she said C2 was the highest, that kind of stuck me. The master plan asked for mixed zoning, low intensity. All the other platted subdivisions had C2, and that kind of stuck me in why I voted no. And it had nothing to do with you, Mr. Lascala. Matter of fact, you were the doctor to a family member, so wonderful doctor. So nothing to do with you, nothing personal against anyone. Just I have to go with my gut and my heart and what I think is best. And if it would have been C2, I would have had no problem with it. So. On another note, I've had a lot of calls from special assessment districts, Indian, Mohawk, Mildred, and Springbrook. For those of you who are not aware, your payment, if you don't want to pay interest, was due. We have extended that to January 31st. So please come into the treasurer's office if you want to pay that off in full without interest by January 31st. And that's all.
Okay. To the property, I disagreed with your comment, Mr. Lanks, because I personally know Paul and Rick and Trudy, and I can tell you that I've sat up here for a long time with these people, and I don't feel like you would ever vote like that. So I just wanted to say that, you know, I believe we have good discussion, and we really weigh in on things, but I've never felt like anybody on this board would ever vote that because of an individual. But I just wanted to mention Mr. Montree will be serving on the Library Advisory Board. Ms. Tinneberry will be going to planning in replace of Lamar. So we expect written agendas, written statements when you get here, prepared, handed out.
I am not verbose. I'm not an attorney. You will get very short motions, not written out ahead of time.
Okay.
All due respect to Lamar.
Couple things. I too like Mr. Clements, I am just so proud of everything going on in this community, all the positivity. I mean, yes, if you are on Facebook, you see a lot of negativity, but you can push the noise aside, and there's so much good going on with our vet center and a lot of the events coming up. The Blizzard Fest is be the 14th and 15th from 9 to 5 at St. Paul's Church. It's going to be an amazing time. I'm super excited about it. We got Santa's box out front and the Township Hall decorated. You can put your letters in it. So I do want to mention the knock boxes are going to be continuing going up. Mr. Steinman, our fire inspector, is going out for these buildings, and they are going with the National Fire Code with this. So we do get some concerns about it because they are expensive, but ultimately when they go to your building for an alarm or for a smoke alarm, you don't want them kicking down the front door or using a saw. They're going to be able to get in there with a key. And ultimately that could save you thousands of dollars. So I think it's a good thing what you guys are doing. I think it's a new thing, and it's hard for some people because it is a little bit of money, but I just want to make mention of that. The Goodfellows doing the paper sale, the toy drive, the collections boxes at the library, the township. We all have these collection boxes. Do It Best Hardware on Fifth Third. Now there's a lot of other locations where you can give toys. Think outside of the box this year for Christmas. Do something for somebody. The Bedford Business Association is doing a food drive this Saturday at their office located at Dean and Secor from 9 to 5. The Lions Den is taking donations. This store is so important to the community, and it's one of our things that draws people to downtown Temperance. You go downtown Temperance, the Lions Den's packed all day long. So I think it's really important to support them. Other than that, no further questions. We stand adjourned.